From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, consider this with Kathy Wyatt, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
It's our house in Hunt, Texas. We are being flooded right now. I think the main thing we might have to do is go up in the attic space.
That was around 4 a.m. on July 4th, and things just got worse for the Towler family after they made it into the attic.
This had a metal vent. I was able to bash this out, and then we spent about 2.5 hours just on this little roof landing right here.
Around 6:30 a.m., they were rescued from the roof by people in cars who were driving by, also trying to escape.
You can see the water line where it crested and stayed for about an hour was just right there.
Yeah, just grateful to be alive. We're so lucky to be alive.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 28th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, climate risks in Nebraska. Joining us to talk more about it are Dr. Deborah Bathke, Nebraska's state climatologist, and Eric Hunt. Dr. Hunt is an assistant extension educator of agricultural meteorology and climate resistance at UNL. Thank you both so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you, Kathy.
You bet. Deborah, I want to start with you and your thoughts on that opening video.
Every time I see that, it's just completely devastating. The damage to property and to the environment and the loss of life it's truly heartbreaking. And it reminds us that we need to continue to make investments in early warning systems to prepare people so that they can evacuate, and to have disaster management plans in place to improve our response.
Okay, what caused that flooding in Texas?
What caused the flooding? The flooding was a result of an interplay between the atmosphere and the geography of the region. So in terms of the atmospheric dynamics, we had the remnants of a tropical storm that's full of moisture, moved up from the Gulf of Mexico, and then it hit the hill country in Texas, which is characterized by some thin soils and steep slopes. And so when we had this intense rainfall that fell on that, it couldn't absorb into the soil, and so it just ran off, and we had a lot of precipitation in a really short amount of time.
Wow, Eric, significant loss of life, lots of damage. Story behind that?
Well, I think they're still, unfortunately, trying to determine the true death toll and the damage. I mean, it'll probably take quite some time to determine the true damage amount. Mm-hmm. But Deb's right. You know, if that had happened up here, it would have been a big problem, but it would not have been probably a catastrophic problem because we're blessed with deep soils in this part of the country that could absorb at least some of that rainfall. Down there, they really did not have the ability to do that. The Guadalupe River is one of the most vulnerable rivers in the country in terms of having that type of rapid rise in water.
Okay, Deborah, I want to bring this home to Nebraska. Talk to us about the types of extreme weather that we have here.
In Nebraska, we get it all. I used to, when I taught Intro to Meteorology on campus, I said it's the perfect place to study the weather because we get everything except for hurricanes for the most part. So we get blizzards, tornadoes, floods, ice storms.
Yeah, we get it all, which would lead me to the question, Deborah, of why did you pick this field? Right? There's so many moving parts. When did you become interested in this, and why do you stay with it?
I don't know when I first became interested in it, but I always say that I was either looking up at the sky or down at the ground picking up rocks as a kid. And I actually did a 7th grade science project on Nebraska's changing weather. And
begs the question, what grade did you get on it?
I made it to the state science fair competition, so.
Wow, you're in the right place.
Known?
No.
Who would have known?
You're definitely in the right place. Talk to us about the differences or the connection between extreme weather and climate.
So when we talk about climate, we talk about averages and frequencies of weather. Weather is, we think about weather, we think about it's what's happening here and now. Climate is that longer term. And what climate change does to it, it's kind of like steroids almost. So we have this increasing trend in temperature that allows more water to evaporate into the atmosphere. And when water changes state, that is what fuels our storms. So it can make storms stronger. And then it also can increase the frequency of them as well, just with a small shift in, say, mean temperature of 1 or 2 degrees.
Wow, we have 2 graphics that we're going to put up for our viewers. The first one, climate risks, and then we're going to put up a second one that talks about the top ones in Nebraska. So really what I want to know, and I'll ask this of you, Deborah, first of all, just walk us through the definition of a climate risk. What is it? And then what are considered to be some of the top climate risks in our state?
So when we talk about a climate risk, it really has 2 parts to it. It has the physical hazard part of it, so a tornado, a flood, or a drought. And then there's the people component of it, the vulnerability component of it. So how have we made preparations for this type of disaster? Do we have things in place to lessen those impacts? It has to do with whether you're urban areas or rural areas as well, age of population and things like that. So it's a combination and the interplay of those 2 things.
Okay, and our second graphic is the top 3 here in Nebraska: heat, precipitation, and fire. So what I want to do is, Eric, I want to ask you, when we're looking at the cities across the state of Nebraska, what types of risks are we really talking about here then?
Well, certainly all 3 of those. I think primarily we think about precipitation just from the potential for flooding impacts, and certainly heat. Now, heat's a big risk in rural areas too, particularly for, excessive heat can be devastating to crops. It also can be very devastating to livestock. We saw that 2 years ago in August, where we had a tremendous heat wave and we had a very large loss of cattle, for example. But in cities where you have more density, you have more concrete, in a lot of cases you may not have a lot of shade, those temperatures can be several degrees higher than nearby rural areas, thereby creating more of an urban heat island effect. And that can make people, especially that are more vulnerable to heat stroke.
Okay, all right. Viewers may be wondering, okay, so how does Nebraska compare to other states? And we have a graphic for that too. And as we're putting that up, Deborah, talk to us about really, at the end of the day, what these numbers mean.
In terms, let's see, we have 19 for fire risk, 35 for drought risk. I like to think of fire and drought and heat kind of going together. They frequently go together. And storm risk, that's something that we've seen a lot of the last few years, seeing with the hailstorms and the tornadoes and the straight line winds that have occurred.
Okay, I want to delve a little bit more into the heat risk. Eric, let's do that with you.
Sure.
How do you describe an extremely hot day in Nebraska?
Miserable.
Miserable.
That's a good one word, but go on, please.
But if you really want a data perspective, I would go and just take a look at observations from like August 21st of 2023 in Omaha, Lincoln, anywhere in eastern or south central Nebraska, because it was extremely hot air temperatures, so upper 90s, lower 100s, very high humidity, low wind speeds, and full sun. So the combination of those 4 things can make heat a lot more lethal. It's not just the temperature, it's also the humidity. So the more humid it is, the harder it is for our bodies to cool down, because we can only produce so much sweat. If we're under full sun, that's worse than it being a little bit later in the day or early in the morning when the sun's not directly overhead. And wind speeds can help induce more evaporation. So light wind speeds, very high humidity, you're just going to sweat and not necessarily evaporate and cool off like you want to. So that's really why the risk of heat stroke is higher when we have these heat waves with humidity. Now there's risk with dry heat too, but usually the air temperatures have to get well over 100 before you start achieving the heat strokes from the dry heat.
Okay, and in terms of frequency, I mean, you talk to anybody, especially when it's so humid like it is right now, and they'll tell you this seems to be happening more often. What is the frequency really, and how are you forecasting the future when it comes to the types of days that you described?
Well, I think we can do more projections. I mean, forecasting would imply that we can somewhat accurately say that, in such and such year are going to be more humid. I think what the projection, though, is that as the planet is getting warmer, as Deb said, the air masses could hold more water with higher temperatures. You also can have more temperature inversions, which means you can be technically hot and humid, but not necessarily getting precipitation. So we can have these rapid whiplashes between really wet and really dry. But in terms of the heat, I think where we're going to have trouble, I think, is the frequency of days that are in the 90s will probably increase. We may start eventually seeing more days getting closer to 100 degrees. I mean, the projections are that we will spend more time in the mid to upper 90s, lower 100s. Our climate may look a bit more like Kansas in the summer in the coming years. So I would say that is kind of, people ask like, okay, what can we expect in summers in a couple decades? It's like, well, just look down into southeastern Kansas, northern Oklahoma. That's probably about what we can expect in 20, 30 years up here.
Wow, which brings me to precipitation. How are we measuring that, and what is that looking like?
Well, how we literally measured it is with rain gauges at different weather stations. I'd like to put in a shout out for all of the viewers here that are COCRAs or any rain observers. We greatly value your observations that you put in every day, because you only have precipitation measurements at certain locations officially. And so the mesonet stations and the COCRAs observers really help fill in gaps for precipitation. And that actually can be very important in terms of trying to determine where we have flood risk. Because sometimes you can get small amounts of rain, say like Omaha Epley Airport, but maybe West Omaha got 4 inches of rain in an hour. And sometimes those observations from the COCRAs observers could really help reflect the heavy precipitation that did fall. And if you're expecting more rain maybe the next day, well, West Omaha might have a higher flood risk than areas that did not get the precipitation.
Eric, I want to ask you, because you brought up a really good point, speaking specifically to the viewers. Talk about how the community is just so important in making sure that you're able to do what you're doing and as effectively and efficiently as you're doing it. Yeah, Deborah?
I would like to answer that. He mentioned COCRAs, and that stands for Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And viewers will be able to go to our site and find a link to that in case they want to join and participate in that. If we don't have it up, we will by the time this program airs.
And I do have rain gauges we can give away.
We do have rain gauges to give away. And that program actually started in Colorado after a big flood event when the National Weather Service wasn't showing the amount of rain to explain the amount of damage and the flooding that they saw. So
because they couldn't.
Right. So the State Climate Office asked folks if they had measurements from their rain gauges in their backyards, and they used that to help reconstruct what happened. And since that started, it's expanded to all 50 states and to Puerto Rico and I believe other places around the world too. So without those observers, we couldn't monitor drought the way that we do. We couldn't monitor flooding and rainfall the way that we do because of the big gaps in between official observation.
I did want to ask you about staffing, because that's ever so important. And I think when we're doing a program like this and people are seeing the two of you, I mean, you're representatives obviously, but you've got the community, but what do you have in terms of a support for your staffing, Deborah?
Us too.
It really is. Just it boils down to the two of you.
Two of us, and
wow.
We have some students. We have money for our salaries, but that's.
We have student interns. We also have Dr. Ruben Banke, who's the Nebraska Mesonet Manager. So that's technically part of the State Climate Office. So they're helping establish and increase the network of stations across the state that can give us the measurements of temperature, precipitation, solar radiation, all the things that we need for drought monitoring. Also, can be used for crop modeling, things like that.
Right. Wow, so really important that people step up if they're willing and able to do so. They just reach out, get a hold of you, and you can plug them in where they're needed, yeah?
But we do have some amazing students, and I just would like to give a shout out to them. They work really hard. And
Cam,
really,
Nick, Rainey.
increase our capacity to do what we do.
Students are very important. They are the backbone of this program too.
They are.
They're also our future.
Yes, totally understand where you're coming from. I would be remiss if I did not get to the third here, fire. Right? So we've talked about how hot things can be. We've talked about the precipitation. What is important, Eric, to know about fire in terms of a risk?
Well, what I really want to emphasize with fire is that it's not just a California, it's not just a Colorado problem. It is a Nebraska problem. And I think western side of the state, they're a little bit more accustomed to seeing wildfires. Now, granted, the Great Plains burn naturally for millennia. That was fire was an important part of our ecosystem. European settlement came in, we plowed up the land, we put in farms, and we stopped having the regular fires. So we now we're not as used to fires, particularly here in the eastern side of the state. And in recent years, we've had a lot of conditions, particularly in the fall, where we've been very warm, low relative humidity, and higher wind speeds. So all the combination of things that you would want, and also very dry soils from just not having much precipitation in late summer and early fall in recent years. And that combination of things makes fire danger pretty high. And unfortunately, every year in the past couple of years, we have seen combines catch fire. Now, I think a lot of farmers really take precautions to make sure that doesn't happen. They'll have a water tanker nearby, they'll have a fire extinguisher in the cab. They'll have a disc out, just try to make sure that if the fire does start, it doesn't spread. But occasionally you see those happen, but other times fires can start for other reasons, sometimes completely accidental. But in any case, what I would really want to impress upon people is those scenes that you saw from California in January or Colorado in 2021, that's not impossible here. Now, it's not likely, but it's not the most impossible thing. And I do think as communities, we should be preparing for how are we going to respond to events like that in the future, because they could happen.
Well, that is a great segue into Deborah's question then. Looking at the states, right, whether we're looking at them independently or collectively, collaboratively, what can, and maybe there are some things that are happening right now that would be important for us to know about, but what can they be doing to reduce the potential in terms of that future damage?
Investing in our warning systems to make sure that communities have a warning system in place, that we continue to invest in that technology to make sure that communities and the state as well, that they have disaster plans and that they don't just sit on a shelf and they actually practice those disaster plans. Investing in infrastructure, we are facing more frequent, more intense types of climate events, but a lot of our infrastructure is 50 plus years old and wasn't built for the types of extremes that we're seeing now, or the frequency of those extremes, or the increased population that we've had. So, and I think I think the main thing is that the science is there, but the attitudes and the policies haven't necessarily kept up with the science for climate change and the increasing intensity and frequency of events. And so a lot of times building and responding is based on what happened in the past instead of what we expect to happen in the future. And Eric and I just got back from our annual meeting of state climatologists in Kansas City last month, and you wanted to talk about a little bit about the Atlas?
Yeah, so there's a project called NOAA Atlas, which they've had several different iterations of this. So one of the things that they do is they show like the risk of having extreme rain events over different periods of time. So for example, how often might you expect, or what would be considered a 100-year event or 500-year event? Or realistically, it means in a given year you have a 1 in 100 chance, so on and so forth. NOAA Atlas 15, so in previous iterations, they had always just used historical data to come up with those totals for different cities. NOAA Atlas 15 was supposed to also give projections to 2050, 2100, what the 500-year flood may look like, what that 100-year flood may look like, because it could be that what used to be a 100-year flood may now be a 20-year flood or 10-year flood. Unfortunately, even though taxpayers basically funded this, it's not going to be available to the public.
And Go ahead. It looks like you
Well, I
want to
mean,
say
just choices being made right now from NOAA. Basically, they only are going to do the historical assessments. They're not going to do the forward projections.
So, focusing on what may be in your control right now. I know you both do a lot of educating. You're doing that here today. Eric, when you're out and about and we're talking about maybe getting caught up to where we need to be in all of this, and you're talking with folks, what are you emphasizing? I mean, and all the way down to how you're presenting, because you may have some people who are kind of shut down from what it is that you're saying. So how is it that you're opening those doors, and what is it that you're honing in on to make sure that at least you can walk away going, I did my job here?
What I really want people to understand is that extreme weather affects everybody. And I think there's a real disconnect. I think most people understand climate change is real and that it's a problem. But I think for a lot of people, it's a distant problem, or it's somebody else's problem. Well, it's really already affecting all of us in some shape or way. And I trying to get people to understand that can be a little bit challenging sometimes. But I think if you can just, even if you have an audience of 30 people, if 10 people take the certain risks more seriously and actually are going to be more proactive about doing something about them, then I think I would consider that a success. In the agriculture sector, a lot of farmers are doing a lot of proactive things to make themselves more resilient to extreme weather.
You talk about people doing something proactive about it. Give us some for examples.
I'll give you a great example in agriculture. Actually, I'll give you a contemporary one. So Grand Island had 7 inches of rain in about 5 to 6 hours a couple weeks ago. There was a farmer about 20 miles north of there in southern Howard County, had about the same amount of rain, and he showed us a video that next morning, him out in his field, no standing water. He'd been focusing on soil health, regenerative type practices that really focus on the health of the soil, trying to restore it to its more native origins, even though you're still putting cropping systems on there. But building up that organic matter allows you to infiltrate more water and hold more water, and that is absolutely critical for being resilient against extreme weather, because it means that you're getting more of the heavy rain that we may get, you're keeping more of it, which means that you're going to have that precipitation in the bank for a dry spell, which we may have more of those.
Okay, thank you for that. I do want to, in the minutes we have remaining, talk about the warning systems in Nebraska. Deborah, I'll start with you. Big picture, what do the warning systems look like here?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that, because that's not really under our purview. We do have tornado sirens, we do have sirens, and that we do have flood early warning system and things like that. Some of the money that has been previously available through the federal government is no longer available for communities to upgrade some of their systems. So that's something that we need to figure out as communities and at the state level then.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about, because I know conversations have to be going on when we've all heard the tornado warning siren, and people respond differently. Some go straight to the basement, some go straight to their front door, some go outside. In your opinions, knowing what you know and having discussed what we've discussed today, is there an ideal warning system that you two would suggest that would encourage people to pay attention and would kind of be maybe more effective than what we're experiencing now? Do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, we do have warning systems, so we get messages on our phone. I think maybe what's more important is getting people to understand that, those are important to pay attention to. And I think, one of the things we could see with extreme weather is that if we see these warnings all the time, if people start just tuning them out, I think maybe there is you set up some very specialized alert for certain areas, like, okay, this is a really, really dangerous situation for you. Evacuate, get down, take cover. I think this is also where local media can be very, very helpful. It's like the local news. A lot of people still rely on local news during severe weather events. And I think meteorologists like Ken Shimmick do a very good job making sure people are very aware of what's going on, getting down, or telling people to get out. I mean, hopefully we don't ever have to deal with what they just dealt with in Texas a few weeks ago. But again, we shouldn't consider ourselves completely invulnerable to that up here.
Okay, I want to wrap this up a little bit by just reminding viewers we're talking about climate risks in Nebraska. Deborah, in a nutshell, let viewers know what your office is all about. You're our state climatologist. What does that mean, and what's important for them to know?
For our office, the Nebraska State Climate Office, it's really about educating people, providing them with data and information and tools that they need to make decisions and support their decisions that relate to weather and climate.
Okay, and Eric, with you being out in the community as much as I am quite certain you are, with or without students, right? The driving force behind what you're doing, when you are bringing your presentations or just your conversations to a close, what are you making sure is kind of that call to action or that thing that people are going to remember?
Well, my call to action is to serve the public. I mean, I consider myself a public servant, as Deb would as well. And my call to action is that people understand what's going on. To a large degree, I talk about the weekly forecast, subseasonal forecast, but I try to make people understand what risk they're facing in a given week when it comes to precipitation or heat or hail, or because we deal with a lot of hail and high wind in this part of the country. And it's just really like, okay, what information do you need to make decisions that could avert a catastrophe?
Okay, very good. Final thoughts. You each have about 30 seconds. Final thoughts on this topic. Deborah?
Pay attention to the weather, be prepared, have a plan in place for your family, and practice it.
Okay, thank you. Eric, what about you?
Preparation is key. And there's Extension Disaster Education Network. Sonny Cochran is the lead here in Nebraska. They do a great job of trying to prepare people across the state for different disasters. And I think it's a situation where we have to calmly go through plans, and then when time comes, we carry those out.
Is there one thing that the two of you can think of if we talk about preparation, which obviously key in so many different areas? What would be that one thing that people at home watching could do in terms of being prepared? That one difference they could make, that one change they could make?
Know a weather radio.
Weather radio?
A weather radio.
Okay.
In addition to that, I would say supply of water and food.
Perfect. Okay, so we have websites that we want to put up for our viewers, and we're going to do that right now for folks wanting more information. All right, so we have two of them here. We have nsco.unl.edu, 402-472-3471. climatecheck.com. You can email them at info@climatecheck.com. I want to thank Deborah and Eric for joining us today, talking about climate risks in Nebraska. Thank you for sharing your time, expertise, and for everything that you're doing on behalf of all of us in Nebraska. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, you bet. Students who are working so hard behind the scenes, and of course to all of you for watching. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNL Television in the School of Communication. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call the UNO School of Communication at 402-554-2600 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.